want to launch right into this. I was asked to come and talk about working across sectors to create the kinds of environments that support the mental well-being of children and youth. And so I'll be talking a little bit what that looks like. In terms of the theme of the symposium of changing landscapes, an obvious sector in this would be local governments. They greatly influence the environments in which children and youth live, learn, grow, and play. And they actually have a huge role to play in strengthening protective factors that strengthen the mental well-being of children and youth. So I'm going to be providing some examples of what this looks like in terms of the health authority working with local governments. But first, I want to talk about communication. Because when you're engaging sectors who might not normally think they work in mental health promotion, or even within child and youth development, you have to pay close attention to what you're communicating and how. So just starting with semantics here. When we say mental health, other sectors hear mental illness. And even within health organizations, that's also the case. So within a lot of health organizations, we have mental health teams, but what do? They actually treat mental illness. So one of the cases recently in BC is we engaged a local government to just gauge their interest in working in mental health promotion for children and youth. And they definitively said, that's not our job. And that's what they were hearing is mental illness. And they are correct. They are not in the business of providing mental health care. But what I find is when we use the term mental well-being, it helps to open up the conversation to a more holistic approach, one that actually encompasses personal agency, genetics, but alongside social and environmental dimensions. You also have to ground your communication in a really thoughtful and solid rationale. For us, when we talk to local governments, we start from an ethical perspective. It is the right thing to do. It's a human right, and it's embedded within the UN Convention of the Rights of the Child. But if that doesn't really sway anybody, then we do bring in a scientific perspective, which is that childhood is the most critical period of human development. That has to do fundamentally with the brain. We know that brain architecture is full on during that time period. So you can see on this diagram right here, through early childhood into adolescence and even into your mid-20s, your brain is fully on fire and you can see a lot of activity. There was a really beautiful child development expert, Clyde Hertzman, who was very active across Canada, particularly in BC, who said that the environment talks to the genes and the genes listen. And what he's referring to there is biological embedding. So the science of epigenetics. And that is the impact that the environment and external experiences have on the human brain. That's so key in the sense that nature is what you're born with. So you have the DNA that you're born with, but nurture is the impact of the environment and external experiences and how that DNA expresses itself. If that doesn't capture them, then local governments also do benefit from investing in the mental well-being of children and youth. There's lots of evidence on how it impacts the local economy, as well as other issues that they're dealing with on the ground. So things like litter and graffiti, neighborhood violence, there are things that they could do within their own scope to help to mitigate some of what's happening. And of course, there's the concept that it affects all of us. So children are considered an indicator species. And just like you have indicator species in other ecosystems, so for example, salmon in a stream, that signals the health of that ecology, thriving children and youth signal a really healthy society. So conversely, if children and youth are languishing, that's an indication that the environments in which we're all living might be toxic. Taking a little bit of a look at what our indicator species in BC is looking like, it's not looking great and it's not trending in the right direction for us. We're really lucky in BC that we have the Human Early Learning Partnership, which does the early development instrument and the middle development instrument. And I'm going to show you what the Wellbeing Index looks like for grade 4 students, that's the blue line, and grade 7 students, that's the orange line, over time. So these are different populations of grade 4 and grade 7 students from 2015 through the 2023. And if that trend line doesn't wake up all sectors, I don't know what would. Just looking a little bit what that looks like from a local perspective here. Back in 2015, there was a policy window for us with the District of Squamish. So they were embarking on their OCP process. Official community plans in BC are legislated. Every municipality needs to have one. It's a policy framework that will dictate their policies over the next 20 to 30 years. At the same time, a couple of years earlier, the Ministry of Health initiated Healthy Communities, which essentially mandated health authorities to work with local governments to create healthy communities. This led to the Health Authority creating the Healthy Communities Collaboration Agreement with the District of Squamish, which is great. On paper, this looks great. And we all know that these things can just remain dormant if not activated. So one of the things that we did was we organized a community event to present data on child developmental vulnerability. This is not something that the district had ever considered would feed into their OCP process. It was a cross-sector event, but we also invited elected officials and senior local government staff. And just to let you know what things were looking like at Squamish at the time, this is the Child Developmental Vulnerability Index. I presented in wave 5. So what this means that 30.5% of their kindergarten kids were found to be developmentally vulnerable on one or more of the developmental scales. And you can see that after wave 5, it continued to get worse and then started to come down after that. The mayor was in attendance at that event and was so shocked at what she saw, she invited the health authority to come and present to council this very same data. The council was so shocked that they passed a motion right then and there at that meeting, which is not normally what they would do. And they vowed to use a child lens in all of the policies in their municipality. This looks very linear, but these things are never linear, just so you know. I'm just doing this to present some ideas here. This led to some early childhood development discussions getting woven into the OCP process, and also the development of a cross-sector Squamish Children's Charter. So in this case, the health authority turned into a participant in these processes, and we also did provide some funding for the development of that charter. This led to 2040 Squamish, which is their OCP, which eventually got endorsed by council in 2018. The health authority reviewed and provided some input into that. And you can see children and youth all over the place in this OCP framework, which is great. So there's the commitment to uphold the Children's Charter, the commitment to develop something like a youth engagement strategy, and they even look at how do they incorporate play across their municipality for all ages, including nature exploration, which is pretty key. I want to point out this was a 3-year process. Things like this do take time, and you can see that the role of the partners in this shifted over time, and that is completely normal. About partnerships, I want to say that this is a word we throw around quite a lot. And in the past, it was a legal arrangement, so it was a very formal process. But nowadays, it can be informal, it can be formal, but it really is a shared responsibility and some sort of collaboration. And ideally, it's with no one party holding power over another. I also want to say that what I've been seeing, and I've been working in this realm for over 20 years, is that with a lot of grant applications, they require partnerships. And I would just want to highlight, there should never be a partnership just for the sake of saying partners. There are partners involved. There has to be some level of strategic intentionality behind it. But what I will add is that working in complexity, so if you work in the realm of any sort of health promotion, population health, social determinants of health, you're working in complexity, and that usually requires collaborators. And that's because there's no one answer in this case. Action needs to be happening from many different angles, from many different levels. Each partner in a partnership needs to contribute something, and there might not be financial compensation for that contribution to the partnership. But if there's strategic intentionality, your organization or your program or your outcomes for your participants will benefit, and that is the compensation. As well, building relationships and intersections is rarely a waste of time if there's strategic intentionality. But I want to remind everyone that we need to be keeping children and youth at the center of what we do, not our individual organizations and mandates. Ultimately, we all benefit if everyone's moving in the same direction for higher collective impact. I'm going to illustrate what this looks like in terms of cross-sectoral collaboration for your program or initiative when it comes to mental health promotion. So here's your participants. They participate in your program, but they also live in their own homes. They might go to school, to childcare. They live in neighborhoods. Maybe they participate in programs in other nonprofits or agencies. There's things like the media. They've got services like police in their area. So let's say your program is all about building social connectedness, which is great. Huge, powerful protective factor for the mental health promotion of children and youth. But they go to school and it's all about stranger danger. That is the key messages that they're getting. And in their community, there's poor lighting, there's no public spaces, communications and signage is only in English. The local media keeps saying how unsafe things are, even if it's the most safe that neighborhood's ever been in its life. And the police are just remaining silent. You can kind of see how all this would push against your program objectives and goals and for your participant outcomes. Conversely, if all of these sectors, or at least some of them, understood their own role in promoting social connectedness and what they could do or maybe stop doing, you could see how this actually would support what you're trying to achieve for your participants. Humans generally don't like change, and we don't need to push beyond status quo if everything's working well. But what we're seeing from the data and from what we're hearing and seeing and experiencing is that things aren't actually going all that well. When you look at the data, it's actually reflective of the approaches and the systems that we have in place. You could actually say that the results that we're seeing are actually an indication that the systems are working perfectly. The systems are the ones that are working perfectly, but are they the right ones to have in place? So for different results, we need to consider different paradigms, different ways of doing. That's another way of saying innovation. I want to give a cautionary tale though. So in BC, we had 3 public agencies come together, school, local government, and health sector, and they worked on a community well-being strategy. Great intentions behind this. Over a 5-year period, this got implemented. The partners met together regularly, but the thing is, no one did anything differently. And so as a result, nothing changed. So partnerships are actually ineffective and a waste of resources if all they do is reinforce status quo in situations where change needs to happen. So how do you encourage sectors to move beyond status quo? In terms of BC, for local governments, there are actually many of them who are already working on protective factors that would promote the mental well-being of children and youth. They just don't know it. So one of the things that we do is we name it. You are working in mental well-being. That helps to enable expansive thinking. So that helps then open the conversation to shift cultures and to change systems. It also helps to build awareness. So one thing that we're seeing in BC is that when we talk about play, there's a very narrow understanding across sectors, but particularly within local governments, about what are we even talking about there. So it does actually include active transportation, children's independent mobility. Nature and exposure to nature is really important, but they may not understand that. So often when we talk about play with local government, they think playgrounds. And playgrounds are actually a 20th century invention by adults, not for children, but to solve an adult problem, which was traffic. So they were meant to contain children, separate them from the community, and they provide a very narrow range of play options for a very narrow age group. So if you understand what play is and you understand how important it is for brain building, you will stop doing that. And it allows, again, for that expansive thinking. It also opens up that conversation to a multidimensional, multi-sectoral approach. Local governments are actually dealing with a lot of issues on the ground because of the mental health and addictions crisis. So it's good to remind everyone that people are generally not born with mental health problems or addictions, and that treatment doesn't prevent new cases. This is generally what status quo looks like for our systems. We wait for people to fall off the cliff. The disorder has developed, a major crisis has occurred, and we provide them with very expensive medical help. But is it effective? So we put in some secondary prevention. Again, usually the disorder has developed and people are at risk for a major crisis. So things like a suicide hotline. Primary prevention is better. It's often targeted programs though, which often we need. The risks are already present and they focus in on preventing mental health problems. But really, the most effective way to address it is upstream. So strengthening protective factors, focusing in on mental well-being, preventing disorders from developing in the first place. And actually, we all work in this realm. So all of our agencies and sectors influence the protective factors and well-being. Local governments actually have a lot of levers that would influence this realm. Things like the usual suspects that their brains will go to, which is libraries, recreation centers, and parks, but other levers as well that they're not tapping into. Street design, social planning, even things like communications and jobs and internships. One of the things that we did at the health authorities, we partnered with a nonprofit, BC Healthy Communities, to create local government guides to promote the mental well-being of children and youth. The content for these guides was created over the course of a year with input from local government staff, so they could tell us what would be the most useful information for you. We honed in on these 4 protective factors: participation, play, safety, and social connectedness and belonging. And this is partly because these are the realms that would fall within scope of local government. Not only local government, and I want to stress that, these actually should probably resonate with all of us, but they are ones that should resonate with local governments. There are also protective factors that we've seen a decline in over the years, and they are embedded within the UN Convention of the Rights of the Child. Within these local government guides, we have a section on what, so a really concrete explanation of what are we even talking about. For example, when we talk about safety, that one is extremely diverse and broad. So it includes everything from physical safety, safety in the home, but violence, bullying, discrimination, climate anxiety, things like that. It is very broad. We talk about the why, which is where the research evidence comes in terms of why that protective factor is so powerful to mental well-being. And it always comes back to brain and brain development. And in terms of the how, we do not prescribe exactly what they need to do. We provide inspiring examples of what local governments from around the world are doing to strengthen these protective factors. And that's because, again, when you work in complexity, there's no one answer. And the actual how in this case is going to come down to what is pushing beyond status quo for that local government in their specific context. Within these guides, we also have sections on how local governments influence child and youth mental wellness, how they benefit from strengthening child and youth mental wellness. A reminder of who we're talking about here. There are 3 age cohorts: early childhood, middle childhood, and adolescence. A section on the importance of quality adults to child and youth mental well-being, as well as a reminder of the potential disparities that can happen between population groups. I'll give you a couple of examples of what this looks like in practice. So within Vancouver Coastal Health Authority, partnering with the City of North Vancouver, generally this is a geographic area that does better than the rest of the province. But is it good enough? So in North Van, you can look at the early development instrument. This is looking at kindergarten kids. In this case, this is telling us that almost 13% of kindergarten kids in North Vancouver were found to be developmentally vulnerable in emotional maturity, with a further 14% at risk. So that's already quite high, and they're one of the better performing areas in the province. If you look at the youth development instrument, which is generally around grade 11 students, you can see that only 56% were thriving in peer belonging. So again, probably room for improvement even for these guys. They seem to be interested in the protective factor of play, which is great. You jump in wherever the window of opportunity presents. And in particular, what resonated for them was an example that we provided in one of those local government guides, which is the plan for play in public spaces that was created by the city of Barcelona. So here we're providing the spark. That excites them, great. They could see how that fit into their own community well-being strategy and other policies that they were developing. So they asked the health authority to do a presentation on this plan for play. But we knew presentations were going to be a one-off thing and they don't necessarily result in any action. So we pitched a workshop. So a half-day workshop, give us that time, give us a variety of staff, and they agreed to that. So this was all around the health authority, helping to enable discussion and connections to happen. We provided money for the workshop. We co-organized it with the municipality, co-designed it with the municipality, but fully facilitated it so that all the municipal staff could fully participate in the workshop. And then they targeted invites to a variety of teams within the municipality so that we could get some unusual suspects in there as well as provide some spaces for other partners. So the District of North Van, the District of West Van, and then another sector, the school district. One of our key roles here was to expand the understanding of what play is and how do you enable it. So when you talk about play, a lot of times people go to programs, and I can tell you that's not usually where the action needs to happen. 94% of grade 5 students in North Van participate in structured activities outside of school in a typical week. We know that generally kids are overscheduled. The American Pediatrics Association was so concerned about this, they were actually suggesting to their doctors that they prescribed unstructured play to their patients to address this deficit. And even the Canadian Public Health Association issued a position statement on unstructured play because they saw it was in such decline. And it is really integral to brain development. In terms of North Vancouver, for kids who never play at a park, a playground, or in the neighborhood in a typical week, 22.5%. Just think about that. And that's part of what a partner does is they come in and they say, have you considered this? This is what's going on. 10% of grade 11 students never spend any time in nature in a typical week. 50% of grade 5 students are driven to school. Again, active transportation and children's independent mobility intersect with play, and at younger ages, it is play. And just looking at some BC level data here, 63% of grade 5 students say that there are places in their community where they feel comfortable hanging out with their friends. Only 63%. And another red flag here is that 30% don't even know. So you can see how this would intersect with play. After this workshop, the city created an ad hoc working group, which they chair. So you can see that partnership roles change over time. So here the health authority is now a participant. We are providing a bit of seed funding. So for ideas that come out of that ad hoc working group, there'll be a little bit of money to action them. But our main role still remains nudging expansive thinking to prevent people from going back into their comfort zone, and that will just maintain status quo if we enable that to happen. I'll provide you just one more example here. This is from the City of Mission and Fraser Health Authority, looking in at the protective factor of participation. You can see here from Mission, in terms of what is current state, they are doing worse than the rest of the province. So 19.5% of their kindergarten kids were found to be developmentally vulnerable in social competence. That is worse than the rest of the province, with a further 14% at risk. Looking at their grade 5 students, just to get an indication of what's happening there, just 45% were found to be thriving in pro-social behavior. Again, not as good as the rest of the province. I just want to poke our heads in on some provincial level data here, though. For grade 8 students who were asked recently, what do you agree with this statement here? I try to make the world a better place. Only 19% of grade 8 students in the province of BC said they agree a lot that they try to make the world a better place. In terms of I believe I can make a difference in the world, only 15% agree a lot that they believe they can make a difference in the world. Think of that in terms of participation and meaningful participation in their communities and in society, and how that feeds into autonomy and a sense of agency, and therefore into mental well-being. For the City Mission in 2024, they created a youth voice committee, which is great, but it wasn't very active. But the thing is, it was an opportunity. A mechanism was in place. In a different part of the city, Fraser Health was presenting at a cross-sectoral active transportation committee, and they were bringing data and research there, so they're playing the role of knowledge translation. And it was at that meeting that one of the planners from the City Mission was at and saw the relevance to this to their official community planning process that was underway. She also noted just how badly Mission was doing in comparison to other areas. So she approached Fraser Health Authority to work in partnership to basically engage more youth, to activate the Youth Voice Committee, and to engage other organizations like NGOs in workshops to basically feed into the OCP process. This led to the consulting firm who was hired to work on the City of Mission's OCP to officially weave youth participation into their official community plan. Again, this is a strategic policy framework that will guide the municipality's decisions for the next 20 to 30 years. This is pretty important. It was around that time that the planner had to go on a leave of absence, and their planning department is extremely small. In these smaller communities, there are not that many staff, actually. There are 2 people in the planning department at the City of Mission. So it was really integral that Fraser Health Authority stepped up and into the lead at this point. And they continued to work with the Youth Voice Committee and developed a survey for middle and high school students. Fantastic participation rate for this, 700 students. And that's partly because when your peers ask you to do something, you tend to do it. Also, this enabled the activation of another sector, the school district. So again, when you're trying to shift landscapes, the more sectors moving in the same direction, the better. At the beginning of it, the school district was cooperative, but not actually that engaged. But as the initiative progressed, interest to use the data to inform school planning design grew. From that survey, the consultant incorporated the data from the workshops that happened and the survey into the OCP, and the Youth Voice Committee, now fully activated, was part of presenting it to council. So at this point, the health authority is stepping back and the city is now taking the lead. And now the city, Fraser Health, and the consultant are creating a document to document the whole process to enable cross-sector learning and capacity building. And there continues to be strong interest in doing this. So they're thinking now about maybe looking at youth engagement practices or using the youth data gathered from the workshops and the survey beyond the OCP. The salient point here is that this is an iterative process, and the commitment to continue to shift cultures, to improve systems, and to change landscapes continues. I want to end with this parting question for you to ponder, not to answer now, but just to keep into mind. How does your organization, your program, or your initiative encourage and connect other sectors to move in the same direction to support the mental well-being of children and youth? So maybe something to keep in mind as you reflect on day one, as you go into day two of the symposium, and even beyond.